And back with the second half of the show. This is a Rob Kall Bottom Up Radio Show, WNJC 1360 AM. This part of the show, I'm co-hosting with Cheryl Byron, one of the managing editors of OpEdNews.com. Great to have you here, Cheryl.
Thanks, Rob. It's great to be here.
My second guest for the show tonight is Naomi Wolf. She's the author of End of America and Give Me Liberty. And her website is naomiwolf.org, or you can really mix it up with Naomi and about 7,000 of her fans at her Facebook fan page, the Naomi Wolf fan page on Facebook. Welcome to the show, Naomi. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. So you're getting a lot of attention lately because you're taking a different approach to the Tea Party people. What are you thinking about them?
Well, I should probably clarify because the reception of a message can so often get distorted by both sides. I should go back to my first principles of what I said in it was an alternate interview actually that seems to have generated a lot of response. The reporter was asking me why she had discovered, much to my surprise, I had no idea, that Tea Partiers were reading End of America and Give Me Liberty, and we talked about why that might be. And then what I said and what I say and what I hold is that I don't, personally ally myself as a matter of policy with most of the Tea Partiers' stated objectives, but that in terms of what they're doing as citizens, which is organizing for themselves, grassroots organizing, that is apart from the struggle they're having, which Tea Partiers who write to me on my Facebook page, tell me about, and granted they're self-selected, they tend to be the Ron Paul libertarian side. They say that there's a struggle for the soul of the Tea Party between Ron Paul libertarians who might respect a lot and, Republican hacks whom, I don't think have the good of the country at heart. But if you go, if the question is, what are the Tea Partiers doing in terms of what I wrote about in Give Me Liberty, that is citizens running their own candidates, creating their own message, not waiting for the pundits or the gatekeepers to dictate what the national agenda is, ordinary people deciding that they are the ones who are going to determine what gets talked about and take responsibility for moving the country in a direction they believe in. That's what the founders meant for us to do. That was my point. And I don't think that the left should just sit back and watch this. I think the left should be doing exactly the same thing. The left should be organizing. The left should be advocating. The left should be running their own grassroots candidates. The left should be generating their own media from a grassroots, bottom-up position. Because that's the answer. That is the answer to the question that I posed in The End of America. And those of you who have read Give Me Liberty, which is a sequel to The End of America, you know that I call for 55 action steps that you can take, and they're all this kind of thing. They are, run your own campaign, start your own nonprofit, write your own op-eds, create your own media. Don't sit around and wait. The people in charge in Congress do not represent us. They're wholly owned subsidiaries of a corporate oligarchy, and do it for yourself. So I hope that clarifies, what it is about the Tea Partiers that I was supporting. Now, that said, individual Tea Partiers from the Ron Paul libertarian side of the spectrum have written to me because I put out a question. I believe, unlike a lot of people in Washington, I believe in treating the people as the experts and not self-proclaimed elite gatekeepers. So I didn't know a thing about the Tea Party's agenda, and except what I read in the mainstream media, and frankly, the reporting seems so biased that I'd prefer to ask people directly. So I put out a request on Facebook. I have a very beautiful, dedicated community of people across the spectrum and around the world who all gather to educate one another about liberty issues. And I said, write to me about what you guys care about and who you are. Educate me. And I got very thoughtful responses. And I did say that there are some things that are coming, especially from the Ron Paul libertarian side, well, I would say exclusively in my experience, that are impressive. For instance, when I first encountered the Ron Paul libertarians, they were all worked up about the Federal Reserve, and I didn't have any information at all that was deep about the Federal Reserve or why it was a problem. And the mainstream media sort of cast people who are concerned about the Federal Reserve as complete whack jobs. But they've persuaded me that greater transparency is necessary, and in fact now there's a transpartisan push for legislation for greater transparency with the Federal Reserve. And another outcome or kind of approach that I respect of theirs that I did mention in the alternate interview, and again, it's an approach rather than a specific policy outcome, is the focus on getting things done through the states. And what I said then, and then I'll pause because I know it's a lot of information I'm setting out, what I said was that if the problem we're facing, which you and I spoke about in 2008, so we were both so distressed and I think remain distressed about it, if the problem you're facing is out of control, an out-of-control oligarchy that is taking over, the executive function and taking over a congressional leadership, right?
Could you define what you mean by the oligarchy? It's a term that you're using a lot in your writing and in your speaking. What do you mean by the oligarchy?
Well, I mean something pretty simple. It's not particularly new, which is just that both political parties are enthralled because of our campaign financing system to different powerful interests, lobbying interests. The Republicans are enthralled to the oil industry. The Democrats are enthralled to the trial lawyers and the teachers union and
the bankers.
The Republicans are enthralled to the military-industrial complex, and to some extent both sides are both enthralled to bankers. And so the influence that they have on the political process in which our Congress people spend 4 hours a day calling people for money to get reelected means that the people's voice is fainter and fainter. That's all I mean. So just to end that thought about the states' rights, that if the federal power is out of control, or rather if the executive power is out of control, states are throwing up creative solutions to breaking some of the sort of more fascistic strangleholds of what we saw in the last 8 years and what's still going on. And I mentioned, and then I'll really stop, I mentioned California's effort to roll back the Patriot Act on a state level and Vermont's effort to clean up the voting system. Now I'm really pausing for breath.
Okay. And interestingly, if you look at the history of single payer in Canada, it started with a province, and it took 30 years to get the whole country covered, but it started at what would be comparable to a state level.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the other, last night I watched a movie, Iron-Jawed Angels, about Alice Paul. Have you seen it?
I've heard about it. I've never seen it.
Well, it's a movie about the suffragist movement to get women the right to vote. Mm-hmm. And there, same thing. It happened at a state level first. So I think the idea of state action happening is a big deal. Cheryl, you had a question?
I was just going to add, it did start at a state level, but the one thing that brought it over the top was that they challenged the Democratic president during time of war when people wouldn't dream that they would do such a thing. They really pushed the envelope, and I believe that's how it came about. They really challenge a system in a way that I would say a lot of people haven't done in the last 8 years. And what you talk about in your book.
What got me thinking in this movie, which you haven't seen, you're at a disadvantage there, but these were very aggressive, stalwart activists taking really strong stands and intentionally getting themselves arrested by standing in front of the White House gates and things like that. I just don't see much of that now. We've got Cindy Sheehan there, and we've got some Code Pink action happening.
Right.
But it seems like the Tea Partiers Are they engaging in activism like that, or how do you see them in terms of activism?
Well, again, let me stress that my sources are not complete. They're very fragmentary. I mean, I get this handful of people kind of being citizen journalists at my request and reporting to me. And I also had just my own experience of speaking last summer in Washington to a rally of about 10,000 people held by the Ron Paul libertarians, who I think have sort of morphed into one wing of the Tea Partiers. So, are they engaging in street protest? I can't answer that. I know that they're engaging in a public assembly because I've seen them. They show up. It was very hot. There were thousands of them. They show up, and that's, I've said this in many different places, and I've said it on YouTube. In my study of how you push back against closing society, that kind of street protest is so important, even if you feel like it's hard or it doesn't make a difference. It makes a huge difference if you refuse to do it in a way that is permitted.
Permanent?
I make this point elsewhere, but the permit process neuters a public assembly. But when people assemble without a permit, basically, it does make a difference. And you mentioned the suffragists. They just stood there, chaining themselves to the gates of Congress day after day, getting hauled off, getting arrested, being force-fed, and eventually it made a difference. In Iran, these street protesters, they're being pushed back, but they're coming back, and over time, that's the thing that makes it impossible for a totalitarian or fascistic system to really consolidate power. I do know of some gutsy protests on the left. My darling friend Mathis Charoux, whom I just saw last night at an event we held for a very brave journalist, Ayman Mohiddin, who reports out of Gaza. But Mathis is a 26-year-old Afghan war veteran, and he's one of the leaders of Iraq Veterans Against the War. These guys wrapped, the recruiting station in Times Square in a shroud and got arrested, and they climbed the Lincoln Monument and dropped a banner and got arrested, and they're just continually, I think they burnt a flag, which I actually don't think was strategically clever, in Washington at a big protest last weekend and got arrested. And they're just not being covered by the mainstream media, but there's a lot of grassroots action that we're not necessarily seeing on the cover of Time magazine on the left as well.
Naomi,
and it's important. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
How do you explain that, the media coverage? That you commented, I think, in your Tea Time in America article about the Tea Party groups being, I guess, marginalized by the media, but they're getting a tremendous amount of oxygen. And it's something that the progressive community, fighting against the erosion of civil liberties in the last 8 years, did not get that attention. How do you explain that?
Correct. Well, I have, unfortunately, kind of a sinister explanation for it. The Tea Partiers, the Ron Paul libertarians, the march I went to last summer got zero press. And the Ron Paul libertarians, even though they were so right about so many issues, got zero press or were always represented as crankpots. I think that since the Republican Party has sent operatives to infiltrate and take over the Tea Party, that's when the corporate media has begun to kind of give them some space. And I think, here's what I think. I think that all of this shying away by the corporate media of covering the things that citizens are doing on the left or the right to say we're not going along with it, I think that it actually threatens them, just as I predicted, that the last thing this corporate oligarchy, kind of with its hand driving the government, wants to have happen is for citizens across the political spectrum to join forces in a transpartisan way and stand up to the Constitution and learn how to run for office, learn how to read the laws, learn how to draft the laws, learn how to write petitions, learn how to lobby and organize and raise money themselves. They don't want it to happen, so they starve the coverage. I think something that I'm very gratified by, which proves this, and it's not about me, it's about the wonderful threat that this poses, is, I floated this notion that people, grassroots, activists for liberty on the left and on the right should join forces. Subsequent, or maybe in that alternate interview. And the right-wing blogs that are funded by big PR firms have been really, really, really attacking me since that happened. So that's really interesting because it suggests to me that that those very, very powerful entities that we think are immobile, that we think we can't affect, the last thing they want is for people to join forces across a partisan divide in defense of the Constitution, defense of liberty, and taking back their government.
Well,
and see it as a threat, and they're willing to, sneer or ignore.
This is something that I've been talking about too. That it would be incredibly powerful if there was some way for progressives and Tea Partiers to find some common ground that they could work on together. Do you see possible areas where that could happen?
Well, of course I do, and this is one of those moments, Rob, where history shows that, how can I put it, when a leader or leaders emerges and asserts that here's common ground and let's get together and work on it, then it happens. So I absolutely do. And here's the principle I'd like to throw out around that. We've got to understand the distinction between specific policy outcomes, which we're never going to agree on because we're in different places on the political spectrum, and that doesn't matter, versus core principles, which we can organize around effectively. And so one core principle is the Constitution, right? And so on the left and on the right, I've seen quote-unquote Tea Party blogs that are practically identical to stuff that you and I talk about, Rob. And I assume you're on the left, right?
Yes.
I assume we're kind of sort of all self-identified progressives. So a giant national push against the Patriot Act, for instance, or for accountable voting, would be one of those core principle American freedom, transpartisan issues. And what we have to get in the habit of is being willing and able to join coalitions around, one or two of these core principles with outcomes that are based on core principles, like rolling back the Patriot Act or closing Guantanamo, or making sure our voting system is accurate and can't be hacked or corrupted. And doing that with people that we absolutely disagree with and want to vanquish when it comes to single payer or, how to address the environment or how to address tax issues. And that's doable. I mean, I made exactly the same case in a book I wrote long ago that's out of print called Fire with Fire, in which I made the case to feminists that they were going to lose the bigger battle if they defined feminism as a checklist of left-wing policy outcomes, like you have to be pro-abortion, you have to be anti-militaristic, because then they were losing the chance to form a broad coalition with all those women who wanted equality but might be serving in the military or might not believe in abortion, but agree on these core principles of women's equality and dignity. And I made the same case that you need to be able to form common cause on the things you do agree with that are core principles and fight, each other on the things you don't agree with, which is democracy. And I'm glad to say that I think today that view kind of prevailed. I think that there's more of a sense that you can be a feminist anywhere across the political spectrum, and I think there's been more effective organizing as women and people who support women for women's equality because we got past identifying this checklist of partisan issues. So here's what I want to say concretely. I've actually reached out to these lovely friends who are Ron Paul libertarians and I believe Tea Partiers who helped me with my book, Give Me Liberty. They sent essays about how to start a grassroots organization, for instance. And they and I have been exchanging emails about having a summit at which leaders on the progressive side and the, whatever libertarian or I guess Tea Party side get together, constitutionalists to draft a game plan of how we can create a transpartisan movement.
That sounds very interesting. A transpartisan movement. That's an interesting phrase.
Isn't that nice? It's not my own, but I love it. I use it all the time.
That's in opposition to the duopoly.
Exactly, because I think people are waking up to the fact that the issue right now is not left versus right. It's not the deepest issue. The deepest issue is people who support liberty across the political spectrum versus, the power holders who really want to close down an open society and want to close down those individual freedoms.
Now, we've got our dear friend Glenn Beck frothing away on Fox News, talking about the Constitution and liberty, but he's doing it to attack progressives. Where do you see he fits into this scenario?
I'm embarrassed to say I really haven't watched him.
Oh, you have to. You got to at least, see if you can stand 5 or 10 minutes of it.
Yeah. I guess what I've come to realize is people, how can I put it? I respect people's integrity and consistency about these issues if they attack the same negatives in a transpartisan way or on both sides. In other words, when I supported Barack Obama, and I'm still happier that he's president than McCain and Palin, just because I think it gives us a little breathing room to organize to push back. However, he's been institutionalizing some of the worst excesses of the Bush years and taking them further than they've ever gone, and the left has really been silent on it. So I've begun to speak out against that. So that, to me, that's consistency on constitutional principles. I would respect a Glenn Beck or one of these leaders on the right if I could hear them, which I rarely do, address equal opportunity hostility at their own team as well as the other team for breaching constitutional values.
I wanted to have you go a little bit more into the way the world looks as your book described it, with the different threats to freedom under Obama. Now, you just said that he's institutionalizing some of these threats.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, but it's very, very depressing.
Well, reality, that's always a good thing.
Reality is good, that's true.
Depressing, though, huh?
It's so depressing because he promised, right? He campaigned on the promise that he would close Guantanamo and he would restore due process and restore our liberties and stop abusing signing statements and so on. And he has, every one of the 10 steps have moved further under his watch. Where do I start? He reauthorized the Patriot Act. He did. I visited Guantanamo in June of last year when he was still claiming he was going to close it, and they were building it up. He never had any intention of closing it, I believe. He has floated a more egregious proposal, which is more of a cornerstone of a totalitarian society than anything Bush floated, which is the notion of preventive detention. There are guys in Guantanamo who have been tortured so badly and in such perverse, sick, and probably sexual ways by contractors or by our military that they can never be let out because it would be such a scandal if they ever told their stories. And he's proposing to hold them forever, with no due process. He proposed military tribunals. He is taking, his Justice Department is taking the same position on government secrecy that the Bush Justice Department did. People are trying to, I know that Binyam Mohammed, who was kidnapped by allies of the United States and tortured by allies of the United States, tried to get information relating to his own kidnap from our government, and Obama used...
Okay, we're back. So where were we?
I was saying that Obama promised to close Guantanamo and yet he's building it up. He is using, his Justice Department is using the same nonsense state national security argument for withholding information from plaintiffs who have been abused by the government, kidnapped by the government, that George Bush did. Not a single war crime under Bush or under Obama has been prosecuted. under Obama, and people have died at Guantanamo. People who knew about other prisoners' tortures, the tortures were, have mysteriously died with no accountability. And Obama's Pentagon has been denying my Freedom of Information Act request, among others. So how has this changed? You know, in some ways it's worse than ever. I mean, 3 brigades have been deployed somewhere in the United States since the end of 2009, and Obama has not recalled them or sent them to a legitimate front, or else sent them home to their families. How is this not moving the dial closer to midnight on the fascist clock? And one thing I have to say I really wonder about, or really don't respect, is, you know, liberals talk about this among themselves, but not that many of them are calling him out on it publicly.
What do you think is more dangerous? Bush having done the torture, or ordered torture, or approved of torture, or Obama basically institutionalizing it?
Well, I love your question. It's a very good question, but it's like saying, you know, who's more culpable? You know, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of like one dictator who succeeded by another dictator. It almost doesn't matter, because they're working hand in hand effectively. It's like Bush. I mean, I've said this elsewhere. Bush created war crimes. Obama institutionalized impunity. I guess what we should really conclude is, which is even more disturbing, is that no president is powerful enough to think for himself or herself about rolling back these movements toward a closed society. What seems clear, especially with the quote-unquote war on terror, is that there, and many sources now, including General Karpinski, whom I also saw last night, you know, formerly of Abu Ghraib, who has now become something of a whistleblower, you know, people are confirming that there's just so much money to be made by contractors and, you know, arms manufacturers in a hyped war on terror and a police state that it almost transcends what any one president may or may not want to do in relation to the Constitution. And that's all the more reason, going back to our earlier conversation, you guys, about, well, can we have a movement that's transpartisan with, you know, Tea Partiers who believe in the Constitution and progressives who believe in the Constitution? That's all the more reason for this transpartisan movement to get going, because it's clearly just changing the parties, the faces of people, you know, sitting in the Oval Office is not going to solve the problem. I don't think Obama personally, as a constitutional scholar, wants to preside over a nation in which, you know, innocent people are held for 7 years and can't see a lawyer. You know, I was in Guantanamo. They've been telling the American people, I was in Obama's Guantanamo, they were telling the American people for 7 years that prisoners can call witnesses, quote unquote, whenever reasonable, and I got them to admit that they had never called a single witness. And that's the system that Obama, to this day, those guys are sitting in those prison cells, you know, many of them innocent, never having been able to call a witness to say, you know what, you've got the wrong guy, you know, or this is not who you think it is. So I think we've got to wake up and just realize that switching parties is not the answer. Partisan bickering is not the answer. You know, left versus right is not the problem. Open versus closed society is the problem.
What do you mean, open versus closed society?
Well, an open society is one in which dissent is possible. With, you know, people can dissent without fearing imprisonment or torture or being, you know, attacked with giant noise machines and radar, you know, sonar, as in Pittsburgh during the G20. An open society is one in which the votes are counted accurately, and an open society is one in which a citizen is no one's above the law, and a citizen can call the government to account for abuses of power, and records are made public, and in which there's a free press. I mean, these are all hallmarks of an open society, and a closed society is where left or right we're being pushed to, you know, inch by inch even now. So I would say we need to reframe who our real enemies are.
And how would you redo that reframing?
Well, I just tried to do it in the last half hour.
Okay.
I mean, to encourage people to transcend left and right, to recognize that the kind of gatekeepers who want us to focus on, stupid policy disagreements between ourselves and, attack each other and demagogue each other, name-call each other, and hate each other, there's a reason for that it's divide and conquer. That the more focused we are on hating the right or hating the left, the less attention we'll be able to pay to the people who are stealing our country and stealing our liberties, and for sure we won't be able to form common cause against them. I'd much rather live in a truly open society, a truly, separation of church and state, three powers, checks and balances, America, in which there's a robust, debate between left and right, and even in which, I've said this, even in which my team isn't winning necessarily. I'd rather live in that society than a closed society in which, people who agree with me, are running things and suppressing other forms of freedom.
What you've got me thinking about is how, I can get pretty negative about the right-wingers, about the Tea Partiers, and sounds like that's something I've got to really revisit, and we all do.
Well, this is a really interesting, tricky question, Rob. I'm not saying there shouldn't be sharp debate and that people shouldn't hold each other accountable or disagree strongly, but in my Facebook community, which really kind of teaches me every day wonderful things, I set ground rules that there is no name calling, and that people should try to be open-minded in not ascribing negative motives to each other and try to hear each other out. And that's very rare. There aren't that many places in America where people from different political backgrounds are encouraged to speak to one another, listen to one another that way. And that's created really beautiful outcomes in terms of citizens really educating each other and bringing information to one another that we're not getting in our different partisan media streams and information streams. So I'm not saying, look, I've been very, very sharp about Sarah Palin. I've been very, very sharp about the organized right wing. I don't agree with a lot of what they're doing, but I try to avoid name-calling. I try to avoid scapegoating and demagoguery. And especially on a citizen level, I think it's so important, if we're going to form common cause and kind of unite against, take back our liberties, so important to approach our fellow citizens with some curiosity and open-mindedness and see, I think it's interesting to see where we disagree and why we disagree and where we can find common ground. But that really does take a lot of discipline and ideally contexts that are moderated so that people feel safe being respectful with one another. You don't get that on Fox News or on whatever, CNN's kind of counterpart to it. And,
But you're getting it on Facebook.
I'm sorry?
You're getting it on Facebook, eh?
Yeah, but that's only 7,000 people. I mean, what we need is a national town square, a national town meeting where we can go back to these values of these are our neighbors, let's hear from them, let's form coalitions about defending our rights together.
Now, I mentioned to you before we started that I'm interested in bottom-up processes. Tell me, this National Town Square sounds pretty bottom-up.
Yeah, I'd love it. I mean, look, find us the funders. I have a beautiful retreat center in the Hudson River Valley, 120 acres, and if we, I'll send out the call right now. If we can find some funding and find some support for the left and the right, people who care about the Constitution to come together, we can all make it happen together, and I can try to get the ball rolling.
That kind of civility sounds like it would be a nightmare for the current power system.
Yeah, wouldn't that be beautiful?
Wonderful.
And what I've found historically is that even if it's just a little gathering, like all the things that changed everything, like the peace marches or the civil rights movement or the women's movement, they all started with these tiny little gatherings. But it was just, I think this is a spiritual thing. I can't explain it in more material terms, and I'm not proselytizing, I just don't get it otherwise. But sometimes people coming together across a seemingly intractable divide for a very good, a very pure motivation, it just creates a shift. It just creates new possibilities. Even if it just happens, even if it's not like 100,000 people, even if it just existed. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. There's a movement called Circles that a number of people have written about, where they bring together circles of people, and I believe it. I think that the other guest on the show with you tonight will be Paul Rogat-Loeb, and he talks about how things can happen by very small changes, and
right.
I'm convinced of that, and so it's really just a matter of people getting out there and doing things. And when you've got a bunch of Tea Partiers actually out there, it dramatically increases the likelihood that something's going to happen. I wanted to throw one idea at you, get your feel about it. It seems to me that the Republicans have recently been using the bottom-up technologies that Obama used and Joe Trippi used, like Twitter and Facebook and all those things. I think that they let the genie out of the bottle. That when you use bottom-up technologies, it doesn't just do things for you; it does things to you.
Interesting.
And I think that these Tea Partiers are people who were connected through the web, and that they've been unleashed, really. And I think that the Republicans created something that they didn't expect, and that they don't know what to do with.
Well, I hope you're right, because the other option is very scary. The other option is that the Republicans infiltrate, and I don't mean Republicans, I mean like operatives, hacks, party animals,
armies,
infiltrate and take over the Tea Party for their own partisan purposes, and even scarier, foment threats and militias and destabilizing kind of anti-democratic violent groups. I hope to God that doesn't happen. But on a more positive note, I think you are really right that, how can I put it, the shift is when citizens, ordinary people, quote-unquote ordinary, start to think of themselves as agents of change rather than passive consumers of political propaganda from either party. It is transformative, because then they think, well, I can do this. Why can't I do that? I can, convene my neighbors to talk about the Constitution. Why can't I run for, city council? It is transformative, and Gandhi knew that, and Martin Luther King knew that. So all the more reason for left and right Tea Party and whatever constitutionalist Tea Party and whatever constitutionalist movement arises on the left to join forces and have clear goals to defend the Constitution.
Well, okay, so let me challenge you. Sarah Palin, you've talked about civility and how we need to talk about these folks that way. Can you do that with Sarah Palin? Would it be possible for Sarah Palin to attend this summit meeting that you have proposed to or would like to see funding for?
I mean, it's a really great question. I don't know the answer to that. I think that with any kind of nascent, very fragile movement that's still trying to work out its mission, that it's best to start truly with people at a grassroots level who are not already invested in by powerful entities with institutional outcomes. So I think it would work better if she didn't, honestly.
So you're talking it would work best with a bottom-up collection of people rather than top-down leaders.
Correct, but having said that, I don't want to make a hard and fast rule because, because then it's already a closed society, right? I mean, on the other hand, who knows? Maybe we could win her over, to be an advocate for the Constitution. That would be win-win.
That would be, wouldn't it?
What if she left the Republican operatives and came over to the side of the people and the Constitution? Anything's possible.
Yeah, well, she's that mavericky kind of gal, so she just might do that.
Gal. Yeah.
So, what about the Democrats nowadays. You know, a couple weeks ago, I attended a progressive media summit meeting that the Senate puts on. And it's about 40 progressive media people there, Ed Schultz and Tom Hartman and folks from The Nation and Washington, and Harry Reid opens it up, and then about 15 or 20 senators come and talk to us. And a lot of the progressive media left scared that that the Democrats are probably well-intended, but they're so inept and so clueless in terms of dealing with power and dealing with an aggressive, carnivorous Republican Party. And it takes me back to where we were when we spoke in October of 2008. What do we progressives do when right now the people governing in Washington...
You know, you're breaking up, Rob. I can't hear you.
Yeah, it's almost like there's another phone call coming in through this.
Yep. Welcome to my world.
Huh. Well, I guess we can just keep trying here. But my question is, what do progressives do now?
What do progressives do now? Well, I would say give up on Washington for now. You know, Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi are not where the change we need to make is located. I would say do what you're doing. You created an alternative media that is, you know, readily available, that brings alternative information streams to people. That's very, very powerful. I would say refocus on, you know, the things I called for in Give Me Liberty, grassroots organizing, running, you know, local campaigns for local issues, assembly, protests, getting arrested, passing legislation to disarm, you know, Homeland Security so that they can't harm protesters, focusing on rolling back the Patriot Act. None of these things are going to happen by making friends with Nancy Pelosi.
Should progressives withhold their votes?
You know, that's a good question. I don't think so. I don't think that does anything. What we should do is create a system of escrow accounts, and I'm talking to various people about doing this, so that when someone votes against the people's interest, they see immediately in real time that people are putting money in an escrow account to defeat them, or else when someone serves the people, they can see in real time that people are putting money into an escrow account to help them get reelected. This would, pardon me, this would liberate candidates from being enthralled to the special interest that fund their campaigns.
I love that. Is this up and running anywhere?
I'm working on getting it up and running. If you want to talk to me about helping me, let's talk offline about getting your help. That would be wonderful.
It sounds really like a great idea.
Thank you.
And you know, we can't have a conversation without talking about healthcare. What was your impression of, one, the overall process that led to the result that we now have, and two, the Progressive Caucus and their behavior in Congress?
Well, I confess that I didn't follow the second part with any care because I'd really kind of given up on following Congress. I think it's I mean, except for sort of tracking outcomes, I think it's largely political theater. And I think what's more important for citizens to notice is that a 2,500-page bill got turned into a law without any accurate, thorough summary of it appearing in any media where any of us could really follow it and make an informed judgment. I think the fact that it appeared in a form of 2,500 pages without an English language 5-page summary from our government, you know, shows how the people are being deliberately shut out of the deliberative process. And I guess I also have to say that, you know, as a liberal by heritage, my instinct is to support single payer or government solutions for things like healthcare. But when your government has been taken over by the medical lobby, by the insurance lobby and various other special interests that are not sick people, it doesn't necessarily mean that single payer is going to be in your best interest, or that a government solution is going to be in your best interest. And so, I mean, I'm kind of withholding judgment until I know more about it. And obviously, I want, Americans to have health insurance, but I'm not persuaded yet that this bill is the kind of thing that we see in Northern Europe, where the government just literally, makes sure everybody gets health care.
Interesting. Are we too far gone? I know you.
I'm sorry?
Are we too far gone? Is America ever going to be able to recover from where we are now?
It's up to us, Rob. It's totally up to us. I mean, if we sit around, watching American Idol and complaining to one another, and that's the extent of what we do, no, it's over. If we, wake up and snap out of it and take the 55 action steps that I spelled out in Give Me Liberty, and join with one another across the partisan divide to, take back our government and take back our freedoms, we really can be a light to the nations again. I mean, I got this beautiful blog post from a guy in Pakistan who said that he came to the United States in the early 80s and he fell in love with it, the freedom and the sense that everybody had that, there was liberty and there was accountability. And those were the Reagan years, so you can imagine. And that now he was saying, like, Naomi, stop. Naomi, I'm counting on you to, you and your friends to kind of get this rogue superpower, which is sending drones into his neighborhood and scaring his child and blowing up near his child's school. He's saying, the U.S. is out of control. I miss that America. Bring me back that America that I fell in love with. And this is so heartbreaking to me because I miss that America too. I think collectively we have the power to bring back that America, but it's going to take all of us. Rob, I'm sorry. I should probably end on that note.
Okay. Thanks so much. You've been great, and we'll continue offline talking about that project. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you. Would you send me the link, please?
I absolutely will.
I'm grateful. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye.